Everybody, just sit over here by the microphone. If I'm not loud enough for you, please let me know because I can be louder if I need to be. There's the agenda. We have some printing difficulties, but basically pretty simple agenda. You get to listen to me all night, so just kidding. I want to just start with some introductions. I'll introduce myself. For those of you who weren't at the last meeting, I'm Kimberly Richardson. I am the River Valley, Montana State University Extension Agriculture, Horticulture, and Natural Resources Agent. You're probably asking yourself, why am I here? I'm here because Bridget reached out to me wanting a facilitator for this group so that all of the entities that established this group could actually participate fully as participants. And so my disclaimer right off the bat, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert in any one of the areas we'll visit about tonight, but I am here to provide the educational component. And I'm a non-biased party. So I am here basically to help you all make a decision with your group and move forward and help you to continue to make those decisions so that you're productive and you're able to meet your mission and your vision. I'm not on any side of this. I am just here as the true facilitator to help you decide and to be able to move forward with tangibles or whatever it is that you all want to do as a group. And so to go ahead and start, I definitely want to do introductions. So 2 things, tell us who you are, of course, and where you are from here in the Valley and which entity, if you are representing an entity that you actually represent. And if not, if you're just a resident, you can just say resident and from the town that you're from. So we'll start with Anna.
Anna Bateson, from the Better National Forest out of Hamilton, fire prevention specialist.
Bridget Mancini, Ravalli County Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator for the DNRC, based down in Hamilton.
Brian Adams, Hamilton Fire, and I'm also Hamilton Rural Fire Board of Trustees.
Jay Meyer, I live east of Stevensville, and I am trying to get the Ravalli County Right to Farm and Ranch Board engaged in this meeting. So I'm a resident tonight.
Judy Anderson, I'm a resident on the west side of Hamilton.
You're not hiding back there.
Oh, believe me, I'm like.
We are.
John McKenna, live in Victor on with the Victor Volunteer Fire Department.
Krista Mortensen, I am with the Southwestern Land Office of the DNRC based out of Missoula. I am the Community Preparedness and Fire Prevention Specialist.
Andrew Amadon, Ravalli County Forester, and I'm based out of Hamilton.
Dave Tingley, Bitter National Forest, fuels, AFMO. Assistant fireman.
I'm Frank Belfry. I live actually pretty close to Judy up about Logic Camp area. And actually I'm representing the Bitterroot Climate Action Group.
Laura Jackson, and I live up Lost Horse about 1.5 miles before the timber, right at the end of the agricultural land. And I'm also part of the Bitterroot Climate Action Group. I'm really interested in land.
I'm Renee Gall, Victor Fire.
And Brewer Florence Fire.
All right, I think that gets everybody in the room, and now we'll go ahead and let the folks online introduce themselves and what entity you represent, if you represent an entity, and then what community here in the Bitterroot you are from.
Who goes first?
You.
Hi, I'm Margaret Gorski. I'm a member of the Ravalli County Citizens Collaborative. The group didn't vote me to be the representing the group, but we've had lots of discussions about the Bitterroot Front project and the discussion about having the RCC group be an active member of your group and interacting with what you guys are doing. So that's why I've joined today.
All right, Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Kimball. I'm with Montana DNRC in Missoula. I work with the local governments. My job is the local government forest advisor And so I work with the county commissioners and their collaborative groups and help them engage mostly on federal land management.
Thanks, Steve. Zay, go ahead.
Well, good evening. Zay Hudson with the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office and Ravalli County 911.
There.
Yeah, hi, Thayer Jocks, Hamilton Unit Forester for Montana DNRC.
And Dan.
All right, hi everyone. Dan Pliley here, District Ranger on the West Fork of the Bitterroot National Forest. Also a resident on the west side as well, up in the Dutch Hill Road area. So thanks.
All right, thank you to all of those of you on Zoom for joining us, and I will try to make this as interactive for you all as possible. I will probably have Anna help me a little bit based on your responses in the chat. Mostly you'll be able to use the chat. I think, Anna, can you give them permission to annotate so they could type in there on like a wall?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can just, we should just be able to give them the setting.
Oh, we do. Oh, we do. No, it's just like a good facilitator. It's not biased, right?
Books online to use, you can click along and see if you can get your annotation tools in your drawings.
Let's group of people all get along for one.
I'm not, we won't worry about it.
Yeah, the facility, yeah, we don't, the facilitator want to not be a member. So that's why we got.
So on your screen, on your screen, there should be, if you click on hover over one of the sides, or maybe would be in your board, you might be able to see it's, you help us with pencil
Steer us to a
and
decision.
on there. Can someone try it and see if you're able to do that? If not, we won't worry about it. But it'll help you all be a little bit more interactive, and maybe in the next meeting, we can certainly do a quick little training on how to utilize those annotations. All right, I don't see anybody able to put some text in there. Should just be able to choose that little drop box, should choose something, you can choose the text across. And since it doesn't look like that, we will just go ahead and let you all utilize the chat, and we'll just have Anna watch that. All right. So this makes it a little bit more challenging for a facilitator when we have our folks online and when we have our folks in person. You all get the great presentation because you're here with us. Not that they won't, but it's just a little more difficult as a facilitator to incorporate what we do in a classroom type setting and what we do online. So question, why am I here tonight? Does anybody have any idea other than to be the facilitator of something? Any guesses? I'll take a guess.
In your introduction?
Yeah, well, it's kind of that way. There are parts of it, but basically why we're here tonight is to really look at the way we are organized, or the way that you all as Fire in the Room are organized. And basically up to this point, it really seems that everybody has gone kind of like with the team, with Bridget as kind of your manager, your overseer, the person who comes together, makes your agenda, sends out the meeting minutes, etc. And so basically the whole point of tonight's meeting is to kind of figure out what this group and how you all want to be structured. So organizational structure does one major thing, which, like I said in my introduction, it's going to help you better make decisions, especially when we have folks that are sitting on the fire side, when we have folks that are sitting in emergency services. You all are linked by your, mission statement that you've created together and that your visions from that group. But each one of us as individuals has our own ideas. We have our own thoughts. We have our own opinions about how things should be handled, how things should be done. And that's, what's going to make is going to be the strength of this group, is having all of those differing opinions and thoughts, but then ultimately utilizing your organizational structure to come to that common goal. And does anybody know what the county commission agreed to maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? It's big, because this group was pushing for it. So the countywide protection plan, or community-wide, wildlife protection plan. And so that's a huge tangible. I know the folks from the county collaborative, they also are pretty excited that that actually happened. I know that, was it 2016 where it was denied, or was it
2009.
2009, okay. And so that's really huge that the county commission is going forward with that. So with that big tangible in place, therein lies the need to have more organization, because there's going to be that system that moves, not super quickly, but relatively quickly, especially when you start dealing with funds, grant funding. There's several funding opportunities coming from NRCS that you'll want to capitalize on. And it's really essential to how this group is going to work together to be able to make that decision. Who's going to make that decision? I'm not going to make the decision. There's the easy answers. I'm not going to make the decision. You all are going to make the decision. And you all need to be embarking on what that looks like for this group. There's not going to be one model, one organizational structure that's going to work magically and everybody's going to get along and everything's going to be fantastic and it'll be out in an hour and a half every time. Just doesn't work that way. We're all different. We're all human. We all have our, challenges, and we all have our strengths. And so it's melding that pot together to make this work and function in what you want to accomplish with your mission. One of the basic things that you start, and you all have already done this, and so I'll go ahead and read that unless somebody has the mission memorized verbatim. Anybody online, any of our Zoom folks? And you can't use Google or Facebook. I can't even do, I'm just gonna read it. So according to your Fire in the Root Council page here, the mission of the Fire in the Root is, Fire in the Root Council's mission is to promote and facilitate the long-term reduction of risk from wildfire and adaptation to wildfire by communities and residents throughout Ravalli County. And right on here, there's a disclaimer right off the bat, which is great in the sense that, it can be a work in progress, but ultimately I think the disclaimer is on here because it's going to be fluid. And as you all web and flow based on your, commitments outside of this group, that mission's gonna look different at different times. Right now, going forward with the CWPP, it's gonna be probably a more tight, more, structured organizational model as opposed to when we're just kind of trying to figure out what those projects are. So the disclaimer is the mission is meant to be fluid and can be modified and updated as needed while we progress and move forward. So can anybody tell me who came up with the mission? Or how you established the mission?
It was a group effort.
And how did you do that?
Quite a bit of dialogue over 2 or 3 meetings.
Yeah.
And did you write it down in charts? Did you just kind of compile a Google Doc? How did you get all of everybody's ideas and thoughts to create that mission?
We edited it on the fly and discussed it, then brought it back the next month. We changed it back to what it was before and then edited it again. But basically, we just iteratively and collaboratively edited until we ended up with what we had.
Okay. Very good. And so you've already started practicing what you need to do as an organized structure model. And did you all vote on that by chance?
I think it was a consensus.
Just consensus?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that this group will have to decide. Do you want to continue with consensus? Do you want to have a voting hierarchy? And again, that's all really up to you all and how that looks. I know with my brief visits with Bridget, you know, looking at the group as a whole, the idea is that the residents and the folks, not necessarily entities, will push the fire and the root council. So it'll be more the residents' input, and then the entities are there as a support unit to provide the expert knowledge. And so does everybody agree with that at this point?
With respect to the community wildfire protection plan, or more broadly with the accomplishment of the mission?
Both.
I agree with it with respect to the community wildfire protection plan. I'm not sure what the broader long-term looks like. So I'm not sure that it's the same model. I don't think it is, but I'm not sure.
And that's okay. You can have multiple models in an organization, and it's really dependent upon what that goal is. Right now, there's that tangible goal. We can kind of see that. We can do an exercise next time too. We wanted just to talk about organizational structures and how you all wanted this to move forward. But it can change, just like a mission. It doesn't mean just because tonight we choose on one organizational structure that that's the way from here on out, that's the way the fire and the root is going to operate. Because guess what? We all might not be sitting here next year. There might be changes in positions. There might be changes in labor. There may be different folks that join this group. And based on everything that I could find, there is no real criteria either that says John can't come and Sally can't come. And one of the things, and I don't know if we have like a spreadsheet that kind of says, but you know, there's Connor, there's Sula, there's Florence. We have all of these communities within the Bitterroot, and it would be really nice to get full representation. And I don't know if this group has had that before and those folks have just kind of fallen away, or it's just, you know, the strong hitting communities that are, yes, we're involved with this. So can anybody share with what that looks like and maybe why we don't have some of those other communities involved?
Because most of your people that are involved with wildfire protection and wildfire risk management are all volunteers. And we are strapped this time of year, guys, point blank. That's why you don't have the Darby people here. That's why you don't have the Sewell people here. I mean, those fire department members are running ragged. I'm surprised you're here tonight, actually. Florence has been crazy the last 2 weeks. And there's only so many hours in the day, and there's only so many volunteers left in the valley. And we have a real lack of volunteerism right now within the valley.
And the 3 people that are here from volunteer departments are all retired. Other, you know, so we have more time, tend to have more time
Than everybody else.
than people who have day jobs in addition.
And the 4 people that are here at every single meeting are paid to be here. So, and that makes a huge, huge difference, guys.
With respect to residents, I think one of the reasons we don't have more representation is we don't have enough impetus going forward for people to understand what we're actually doing and whether they can play a part.
Yeah.
They're waiting to see if it's worth their time.
Good point.
Excellent point.
Yep. And that's gonna be the big piece. I mean, in volunteers, as we all know, ebb and flow all the time. And right now it's critical. We can't even find labor. And I, you know, can relate in that because I'm a person doing the jobs of 4 people in my office right now. I don't have an admin and I don't have 2 other agents. So I'm having to run that show and it does, capacity becomes limited. And so figuring out that capacity and therefore having this organizational structure, because that needs to look like what your membership looks like also. You know, is this I sign in when I'm 25 and then, you know, I don't get to leave till I'm 85? Really, what does that really look like? And, you know, we look at different structures on, you know, is it a 2-year term limit? Do we need to have a term limit? Does anybody in the group, you know, definitely believe term limit will solve everything? Or, because I'll tell you, it's not. There's, you know, there's ways to construct this to where it makes it easy, but when folks don't know, especially the residents, okay, I want to be a part of this group, but I don't know what that time commitment's gonna be. Can it, is it gonna be weekends every weekend until, right in the middle of fire burning season, when those permits go out March 1st, and that's when I'm supposed to be at all of these meetings? Does this meeting time work for most of those entities? I know that the convenience of having folks online, that has helped, letting folks, especially the ones that are at the north and the south end of the community, be able to probably attain and be able to join us in a meeting more conducively, and especially with fuel looking at $5 a gallon is gonna make that pretty interesting as well. And so there's lots and lots of different challenges, and coming together, trying to figure out which structure works best for this group. And maybe it is only for the CWPP, we have this set group, and that's how you move forward. Then, as things evolve, as projects come to the table, then, what does that look like? But that's the key piece, because we don't, and I'm using we, but I've been told that the group really needs to be coming from that kind of like grassroots, residents, volunteer players, as opposed to the entities being in charge of, hey, I'm gonna make the shots, but guess what? I work for this group, so I'm gonna push my thoughts and, priorities first. And so trying to figure out that intertwining and that play between, all of the players that are here is going to be critical on how that looks going forward. Does anybody in the group right now have a real strong feeling of what your structure should look like? And we'll say for the CWPP right now, because that will be our goal moving forward.
We discussed that a few meetings ago, of what that would look like. And we talked about the concept of having a core team of people that are pretty integrally involved in the development of the plan, interaction with whatever consulting arrangement we make. And then a number of sub-teams made up of people who are not members of the core team plus others, so kind of there might be a sub-team that deals with insurance issues, or a sub-team that deals with federal land management issues or state land management issues. And then put those pieces together. And the core team would be relatively small, probably. And we also talked about potentially having a need for a formal project manager, so that we can keep all the pieces on the table and moving in the right direction. So those were the discussions we had 4 meetings ago. I don't know that those were decisions, they were discussions. There seemed to be a general consensus that would work, and that we could even have co-leads on the core team, not necessarily one leader. But there was no vote, and there was no, yep, that's it, because at that point we hadn't gotten the commissioners backing. We had support from all the other people who signed the 2006 and the 2009. But in the absence of support from the county commissioners, no sense making a team if you don't have a game.
I also, so I guess for most efficiency, I would say let's focus on just fire and root as a group, since the CWPP, we will have a not a coordinated consultant, thank you, to help kind of facilitate that piece. So really getting us organized as a group so we can, be prepared to take action as, with their direction. So they're gonna be kind of giving us most of that direction for the CWPP specifically. But so for our group, how we can keep working on other projects or just, decision making. So for our education and outreach committee, we've been working on a few little projects here and there. And we keep running into, do we have to bring this to the council? Do we have to bring that to the council? How are we supposed to make our decision? So kind of like more of the inner workings of just our group rather than, because CWPP part will be,
Specific.
yeah,
It'll be more mechanical. So-
Yeah.
So it has, there's some definite feedback loops between the consultant and the team that we put together and hence the council. But it's still a lot more, for one thing, it has such a narrow scope compared to all the rest of this. And so.
Yep.
That seems like that one is. It's not fleshed out, but at least it's been discussed.
Mhm.
And it has kind of a logical organizational structure that fits with a consulting. And I think we almost have enough to put together an RFP. Obviously we'd have to run it by a lot of people, but probably enough to start something anyway.
So is the group familiar with the 3 basic structural organizational models that are out there? Because you just kind of gone into one, which is the team-based model, which it sounds like, and based on the little bit that I know of what the council has done, that's what I would assume, or how I would assume that you are currently operating is under that team-based model, with the exception that there is not a, what you would consider like a governing body or a governing team that actually, the rest of the committees come to and say, okay, we want to go forward with this project from the fire, department, volunteer fire department groups, and we want to go with this idea from our residential group. And so the team model works really nicely, especially because we have different experts from different areas. And so that is a very effective model. It's just figuring out who is going to govern that piece.
Right, there's no governance at all of that.
Yep.
There's the education and outreach committee, and then the discussion about a team for the CWPP, and then, the preparation of the stuff for the commissioners. But there's no governance other than presenting this stuff to whoever's present, and if there's a consensus, okay. If there isn't, well, let's do it again next month. That's the governance.
Yep, and that's, I think, the
Maybe a little
piece that
cynical,
needs
but,
to maybe shift so that there is that power person. So the other 2 models is the matrix model, and let me know if you all have any idea what that is. Okay, and then there's the hierarchy model, which everybody should be familiar with the hierarchy.
Explain them all, so we'll
Yeah.
all be on the level playing field.
So the hierarchy is the most traditional. And so that has a CEO, CFO, a president, a vice president, whatever you want to name those individuals. But ultimately, it kind of looks like a pyramid where you have someone on the top that ultimately gets to make that decision and ultimately start saying, okay, education committee, I want to see, 7 tangibles by the end of the year. And that person or that board of people, because it can look both ways. It can be one individual person, or it can be a board, a group that actually comes together and is in charge of making those decisions based on the input from all of the other entities below. And you can, make that as complex or as simple as you want to. You can have it, broken down based on residents, volunteer firefighters, et cetera, until you get to that hierarchy. So there is that model, and most organizations, because that's the most familiar and it's the simplest and it's the easiest to make sure that everything's functioning, as best as it can be to accomplish the goals. That's the one that most people default to. The team-based is that everything's done in a team. So even at the top, it's still a team, and that team can look a million different ways. You can have, a group leader in each of the teams, each of the committees, if you will. So like the educational committee, Judy, just for example's sake, you are the chair of the educational committee. So at the end of the day, though, you still are responsible of that hierarchy team that kind of says, okay, let's hear this is what the educational committee is coming up with. This is what the volunteer fire department groups are gonna come with. This is what DNRC is coming with, and each person would have a spokesperson, so it's still a team structure because you're coming to consensus with that team, but that hierarchical team structure. So you would have all of your lower teams, and for example, you could have that CWPP team where that's all they do. That is their expertise, that is what they work for, and then they bring that to the main team that says, yep, you're doing great, or nope, we gotta restructure this because we have to incorporate what the volunteer fire department needs. Or we have to incorporate what emergency, needs, or insurance, whatever that looks like. And then you have the matrix, and the matrix kind of has it's kind of a splash of the team as well as the hierarchy, so that you have a leader in each of the groups, but then each of those leaders is responsible to another leader or another set of leadership groups. So you say for education, for that same example, Judy's the group of that, but then education is broken into written tangibles. I don't know, signage, etc. And so then each of those has their own team leader. And then Judy would oversee her piece, but then all of those folks, all of those leaders from that particular education, whichever entity they were in charge of, would come through and come to the table, which makes it more complicated because you have more bodies to make that decision. And so any of those models work. You can make, take pieces that you like from that. And I was gonna show a video kind of that depicted each of these in a more, I guess, educational platform, but I thought it'd be more important to see what you all want, because this is your council. And so is there a need from the group to have that hierarchy? Do you think that you would get more buy-in? Do you think, what are the advantages to this group if you had that hierarchical system? And we can outline that. I brought sticky boards that we can do that with. But just right off the top, what are some of the advantages of having that traditional hierarchical type of structure? And you can
Well,
throw out anything.
I think one advantage of having some component of that would be if there is an impediment to moving forward with a particular project, that there's questions about, well, is this the right way to go with the council behind this? And having to wait until the next monthly meeting, whereas if there was some oversight, and as you're talking about hierarchy, I relate back to the incident command system, which I think has some application in this respect, where you've got several teams, but there's a reporting process, so that there are decisions that can be made on the spot in the field, and then there are other decisions that are more strategic with respect to deployment of resources, direction of activity. So, and it's kind of, I think we're probably going to have to kind of feel it out once we get, we've made a huge milestone in getting the commissioners to be supportive of the effort. Now we need to decide and prioritize, and obviously getting an RFP out for the CWPP is probably priority number one. But that doesn't mean we set aside and disregard all the other stuff that could be going on with outreach, educational activities, and even boots on the ground, and getting busy and engaging people to get involved with doing the risk assessments. Because coming from a fire suppression standpoint and prevention, I think that is the one thing that we can do that can have the most immediate, most direct impact on reducing risk and exposure to wildfire from a private sector standpoint. Not to disregard what DRC and the Forest Service is doing, because we've got this huge interface of public and private, so we need to work cooperatively. But in my, I think this organizational structure, I think can be fluid and adaptable over time as we encounter different situation. But I think some form of kind of a project manager, even at our, and I'm not talking about a private consultant, but I was a private consultant and I've done a lot of project management. So I think even at the outset of, of deciding where we're going and getting some things on the ground, getting some ideas, crystallized, that a project manager, if you want to call it that, somebody that can give some direction absent the meeting of the entire council would be beneficial.
Any other advantages of having that hierarchical system? Because I think that's the number one, is that there would be an entity in place to make those decisions, given the caveat, who is that entity? Because it's gonna be somebody within this group. And what is that gonna look like? Who is that gonna be? Who's gonna step up to the plate for that? Is that something that's voted in? Is that something that's looked at over time? I mean, there's just certain things that need to be kind of, fleshed out to be able to move forward with that, because the membership is you all. And so what is, those are the key questions. Who is that gonna be? If you have this hierarchical group, what does that look like?
I guess two points. Obviously, the big advantage of having a person or a board, someone who is the responsible decision-making entity, someone or some group. That's efficient, because then these various teams or committees can bring things forward. We can discuss it at meetings, but we can get a decision and move forward with them. So that, I think the efficiency of having a decision-making body or person is worth keeping track of. And that's probably the biggest thing. And then when I mentioned a project manager, I really think of a project manager in the Project Management Institute context, where it's somebody who is not the decision maker, but works for the decision maker and the team leads or whatever, and just keeps things moving forward and keeps track of stuff. So that's their job, is to keep track of things, know the consequences of things falling behind schedule, knows who the contacts are, and keeps things moving. And until we actually start a CWPP, or perhaps we could use it during the RFP, but certainly when we get to actually doing a CWPP, there's a lot of moving parts. And whoever the team leaders are, we discussed the fact that they really can't be federal or state or county employees. Well, that eliminates the people who do this for their day job. So that really means that the team leaders would have to put that much more time in the absence of somebody doing classic project management, keeping track of all the moving parts. So that's, when I said project manager, that's what I meant, is somebody who keeps that stuff going and keeps track of things, not a decision maker, and not a team leader. And so back, having some decision-making body or person provides a lot of efficiency. Now, how do we get there? It probably would have to be some kind of representative board, because again, you can't pick a federal employee, you can't pick a state employee, you can't pick a county employee, but you have to have those represented in the decision-making process. So it almost has to be some kind of a board structure in order to represent across the board entities without any one of them being too prominent.
You can have them be non-voting members.
You
That's-
can,
that's really
or
common.
you can have them be voting members, you know, or you can have a consensus model for a board, you know? But, and you have to have an odd number if you're gonna have votes, and you have to have a chair, you know, to organize the, you know, all that board stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, seems to me to be the logical approach. And the state, county, and federal entities are easy, you know, because that's part of their job, you know, and they would obviously report back to their respective leadership. Who the other ones are, should we, you know, we have one person to represent all volunteer fire departments, and should that be the chair of the All Valley Council or not? You know, I mean, there's lots of variations, but something like that.
Anything online, yeah? Is there anybody online that wants to chime in on advantages of the hierarchical system structure?
Can I just ask a question about the person we're talking about? I think we're calling it project manager or facilitator for the CWPP itself. Is there a reason that person could not be also overseeing and coordinating the other parts? Like education and outreach? Is there a reason that person that we're going to hire and pay can't also coordinate those things?
I think their
Maybe
role
you-
is gonna be different.
Yeah, I mean, in the classic project management context, a project is a specified thing with a goal, yeah, a very defined thing. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have a project for developing a CWPP and a project for developing and implementing education and outreach. And the same person could be the project manager for both of those. But they are separate projects in the sense that they're different objectives, often different people. And they won't have exactly the same project plan. I sound like a project manager. But I don't want to be that person.
Probably
But, yeah, but I can't speak strongly enough of how valuable that is in an organization. Because otherwise things slip between the cracks.
Well, I guess I always imagined all the way along that the outreach and education team, whatever we're calling it, was just one little portion of the CWPP. So I'm unclear on why now it's separated out. Is it because we got ahead of
They
the
were
game?
They were always separate from each other. So remember, at the beginning, we kind of looked at that whole fire adapted communities wheel. So that Fire in the Root Council is kind of at the center of that whole wheel.
Right.
So ideally, we'd have a person from each sector of it, which for those who haven't seen it yet, this is confusing, but and I could pull it up. But so then the council is composed of each little one of those pieces, and that's those committees, and each committee is doing their own kind of project. So that like fuels mitigation, that's its own kind of sector, and we have representation from the Forest Service, DNRC, NRCS, who does those projects specifically. So each is going to be kind of a separate thing, but all falling under Fire in the Root Council, since that's kind of our mission, addressing that wildfire risk and mitigating that.
I think another way to look at it too is that the CWPP plan will have an education component to it.
Definitely.
But in the meantime, This plan's gonna take, I easily estimate 12 months to 16 months to do. It's gonna take a long time. Right now, we have an education component that we need to get out to the community right now. I mean, we need to be working right now with those people to get ready for the summer. And that's something the council needs to be going forward with.
Right.
While the plan is taking place over here. And that's why it's really important to have that education component set up and you running it and making sure that we're getting that information out to people right now, because they're gonna need it right now.
At the same time, what you're producing will be feeding. become
It'll be
adapted
part of our
part of the
plan later on, but
CWPP.
you're like,
Right.
I'm gonna say, you're like an eon ahead of us right now. The plan itself is back here and trying to catch up, and it's gonna take it all summer and all winter to catch up with you. But right now, you need to keep moving forward, because it's really, really important.
So like the education plan can bleed into, I mean.
Right, it'll be part of this in the end when this catches up,
Right.
but right now, we need to be pushing the
Right.
education too at the same time.
Right.
Well, then the flip side of that is that if it comes into the plan, then once the plan is signed, then it comes out of the plan and gets implemented. So
It's even
it
more.
really goes full circle.
Will the plan also somewhat direct?
More of the
eventually
education, yep.
How the education should
Yep.
be
Right.
prioritized.
Yes. And that should be informed by what we're doing, what's working, what's not working, and so on now. And then feed back into it after we're done with the plan so that we can revise it appropriately.
That makes sense.
Does that make more sense?
Yeah, so what I'm understanding then is that to be the most efficacious we can be with both sides, is that the project manager, quote unquote, or whatever, your monitor, or whatever it would be. It's like you'd be splitting them off and they would be holding two pretty different kinds of ideas or energies. And that doesn't sound like it'd be efficacious to me, really.
There's certainly a limit to how many things you can keep in the air at one time.
Which is where we're at right now. with
Right,
the past.
yeah, that's great. From listening to what you both of you said, that really struck me strongly. Yeah.
But realistically, the thing that will have the most moving parts of what we have in front of us right now is the development of a CWPP.
Right.
In coordination with a consultant. And that consultant will have lots of good ideas, but they're not the decision maker either, right? So we need to be able to keep track of those ideas, move this stuff forward and come up with a good plan that will get signed on the other end. You know, yeah, we got support now, but we got all the way to the finish line last time and the county commissioners didn't sign it, even though everyone else did. So we don't want that to happen. So this plan should reflect for Valley County's needs.
Do we have any idea, since it sounds pretty important, why they didn't sign it last time? What did they object to in the plan?
Without getting into too much detail, they didn't like the idea of having a wildland urban interface map, and people thought it would affect their insurance rates. But it came out in the discussion and the presentation to them from the insurance people that the WUI map is irrelevant to insurance rates. And then that's a direct quote, by the way. And so there was that, and the potential for additional building code restrictions and other things that now, and zoning, that now they recognize that those don't come out of a non-binding plan. Those come, they have to make those decisions. They don't get those decisions shoved on them from a
So
plan.
the plan is intended as guidance for the commission.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Use it.
Well, for the commissioners and everyone else, and to coordinate with federal agencies and state agencies and cross-boundary projects, et cetera, et cetera.
So we know it didn't work and we're not going to do that.
Right,
It was painful.
right. You know, and I don't know where the consultant may or may not come from.
So they will
But-
now fund a consultant
No, actually, that's a DNRC.
NRC will,
Yeah, but that's part of this discussion is that we have to get the funding.
Right.
We have to do the RFP, which takes that participation and takes, there's decision-making with that too. What do you put in it? Who's doing the RFP? How is that? So that's why, like, all of this is integral to even getting the CWPP off the ground. So
Right,
that's
'cause
why this organizational talk too.
Right. You need to have basically somebody that's willing to put the energy into putting together an RFP.
what is
And-
RFP?
Request for proposal, I'm sorry.
Okay,
It's a
sorry.
grant. You're
I
writing
am-
a grant.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
I missed that one somewhere.
Yeah, you're writing a grant.
I'm usually pretty good about not using acronyms right out of the box. but,
Make it work.
So, and
And
that,
that's what you give.
I mean,
them.
getting all the letters of support was the first step. And then getting a request for proposal to the DNRC and others perhaps to get the funding to then do a community wildfire protection plan, CWPP.
That one I got.
Okay, it would be the next step. But each of those, like, it required a certain amount of organization to run the trap line and get the letters of support. It'll require more organization to get an RFP together. And it'll require even more to do a CWPP if we get funding. So every stage has got to have more organizational structure.
And the giant question is who is that gonna be? It's not
Right.
gonna be me.
Right,
And,
not-
and it's not gonna be Bridget, and so there are, like, that's a true and a real question is, who is that gonna be? Is there a volunteer amongst all the volunteers that says, sign me up? Do we, as a group right now, do we have the capability? Do you think you can represent the rest of the folks that aren't here to say, we're gonna go with a hierarchical structure because that's the most efficient, that's the most productive? It's really trying to come up to that, what that decision looks like and what that membership includes, like, if you are voting members, who is that voting members and who says so?
Right.
And, is that project manager is gonna come in and run that project and go by the plan, but the project manager's not gonna have anybody to report to if that's not already established.
Right,
And
and then there's
so-
no point in having that.
Right, and figuring out how those pieces are gonna move, especially when you have the entities that are all pulled away from the table. What's left is really residents in some sort of capacity, and then who are those residents? It could be definitely a board, if you could get buy-in, like ideally it would be a representative on that board from each of the communities as the liaison to each of those communities to go talk to their volunteer fire department or whatever that looks like. But who are these people? Is there a group amongst the group that you already have? Is this going to be something that you would have to recruit for? And I guess ultimately is trying to figure out what that structure is.
Right.
And do you want to go with the team? Because a team works well, but just like any of the other models, it does have its disadvantages because you have to have teams established, and who decides on how those teams are established. And the matrix, that works, also. However, who's going to be the person that moves that forward? And if we stay all as individuals, which is the way a true team system works, and we all come to consensus, it takes an extraordinary amount of time to be able to go through all of those weeds on that and figure out how to make that work. Whereas again, the hierarchical system, it's not perfect, it's not great, I'm not pushing that, but it does have the advantage of being efficient. The matrix, the major advantage of the matrix is that you have an entity or an expert, if you will, that is responsible for making that decision for their particular entity, whether it be education, whether it be CWPP, whatever that looks like, and they could report to that project manager. And speaking to that, do you all have a project manager in mind? Is that going to be a position, a paid position? Obviously, at least it sounds like, to somebody that's going to be local, or, what does that
Who's
look like?
going to pay
Yes,
for it?
and where is that funding gonna come from? The other thing that, is a definite disadvantage with the group is that you meet monthly. And so there's all of that time, there's,
We
3
meet
other
monthly and we
weeks.
have no money.
Yes.
Those are your two things to remember. We meet monthly and we have no money. We have zilch.
So those are the things, looking at your structure of what that is, and so there may need to be a fundraising branch of that and going after grants continually so that there is that funding source. Or maybe, one of us is infinitely wealthy, not me again, but can make a giant donation to the fire and the, I mean, those are the things that, you definitely need, where, again, speaking to capacity, there's gotta be several different individuals. This can't just be a one-man show or one woman show or one person show. There's got to be enough buy-in, enough feedback from those groups to work efficiently. And so really trying to determine what that looks like will help start going through that step. But it really, is this group, would we say this group is quorum with the folks that are online? Do you want to even accept a quorum that's online? Do they have to be present? I mean, there's all sorts of different structures that can be, but this group has really got to figure out where they want to go with that. And is it a hierarchical structure? Is it a team structure? Is it a matrix? And it doesn't necessarily need to be just for the CWPP, kind of looking at that little small window for right now, but as a whole, how do you want to operate, and how effectively and efficiently are you going to be operating if this is all we got?
So
I think,
to
number one,
go-
we need to be thankful for everybody online.
Yes, we are
Thank you
thankful.
very much.
So to go back to the discussions that we had about the CWPP, and that was the beginning of this discussion. The first task was to round up letters of support and present to the commissioners. The next task will be to chase down some kind of request for proposal. But when we did that, we really did that using a team-based model. That was our underlying assumption. But there was no governance to it. It was a team-based model of worker bees, not who was going to make the decision even in that group. There would be a team leader or a couple of co-leads, but not to make decisions, but to just keep things moving. And that's as far as we got. And we did actually identify people who would be interested. Some were not present and they got volunteered. Others were present and they graciously volunteered. So that's as far as we got when we were doing it, but it was a very task-oriented approach with no governance implied or directed.
When determining, sorry.
You can go ahead, because you might say the same thing I'm gonna say.
Well, I had a question. I mean, would kind of determining membership be a good place to start? Like who's even a part of the group? What makes you a part of the group? Help to then facilitate maybe deciding on an organizational model? I don't know.
It
Not
certainly
sure.
could be one of the
Because
steps,
we don't, that's
absolutely.
one thing we haven't even discussed either, what makes someone a member and what, gives you the ability to make a decision too, I mean, so far it's just been who shows up, so.
Seems to me that if we identified the needs of the organization, then we could determine what that organization looks like. So education, and there's a CWPP, and there's 3 or 4 other things, and we'll come up with an odd number. I mean, it seems to me like identifying the needs of the org will help paint the picture of what the org needs to be.
So to add some context to this, when we started the council, we did the traditional steps of this defining our mission and trying to work towards establishing those goals. and doing exactly what Dave was saying, right? Figuring out those point areas. And I guess I have just points, because I also wanna address Ken. And so it was really evident that the members wanted to move and wanted to have tangible items to work on immediately. And so we focused on the CWPP and outreach as two items that we could really move on quickly and could produce tangible results. And we looked at the fire adapted communities wheel as, you know, adopting all those elements that need to be addressed and all the representatives that need to be a part of it. And we pulled from that those items that we felt we could address and move on quickly.
We started off with 3 actually, so
Oh,
it's
that
funding, education and
and
outreach, and
fuel.
CWPP.
Oh, that's right, okay, yeah, that's right.
But that's where, so we had a few volunteers for each of the committees, as maybe 2 to 3 for each. Got volunteers for funding, but the request was that none of them wanted to find the funding. They wanted to help support kind of the RFPs, but not find funding opportunities. And then education and outreach, Judy was our one volunteer, and then I kind of volunteered myself to be on every committee since I'm leading all of this. So I'm automatically on all of the committees. But then we found, you know, funding capacity wise, we didn't have capacity to focus on that. Education and outreach, we've been doing, you know, a decent amount here and there, but again, still, we figured as a group, since CWPP was a big, easy, tangible one that's really good, needed to be done. And it also will essentially provide our group a structure and kind of a guide. So
Well, and it was
ideally.
time sensitive too. We had to do it.
Yeah, we have the opportunity for funding, so yeah. But ideally, Fire in the Root Council is gonna be the group that helps to keep the CWPP going, make sure that it's not just getting put on the shelf. So everything that gets in there is gonna be put onto the ground. So that's kind of, you know, was where we decided to just, we're gonna work as a group only on the CWPP update, because we don't have capacity to take on anything else right now. And again, like myself, Judy and Anna have been working on education and outreach on the side. But as far as capacity goes, that CWPP was the only thing we've.
Well, and funding too. I mean, you can only do so much without funding.
Yeah,
You know,
on top of
we're
that.
relying on our partners right now for a lot of the community engagement, outreach, tangibles. as far as that.
And
I'm gonna ask a question before we talk any more about organizations. So let's talk about cider, talking about funding. I was always under the impression that it was your position with the DNRC to write the RFP once we got the county commissioners. Because I'm under the impression that non-federal or non-state, non-county employees cannot write and submit RFPs. And I'm pretty sure that's a state law, that you have to be a county or state entity to write and submit an RFP.
No, because
Byron did it on part of the RCND for the county when he did it before. The money before, so everybody knows, also the money before that wrote the first CWPP, that actually came from the funding of the fires of 2000. And that was the funding mechanism. And then the RCND, Byron accepted the position of the RCND to help manage the funds after the grant was written, for the RFP was written and submitted to the state. And then it was actually, the funds actually went to Bittert National Forest and they went to the RCND. And then Byron oversaw that grant funding process and signed off like on everybody's paychecks. He was the supervisor of the project.
That was for the 2006.
But that was for the 2006 one, and that's where the money actually came out of fires in 2000, is where it came from. So
And what about the next one?
the next one's done the exact same way. They did the same funding scheme was with the next one,
So they all came out of state, right?
state and private funding. So all state and private forestry funding.
This is state and private administered through the DNRC. It's a grant that the
DNRC administers and manages. So,
Okay,
and I thought that was in your position that did that.
no.
So we need to check on that. We need to check and see who from the state actually administers it.
Well, yes, but no matter what.
And who writes it, because somebody has to write that RFP, and it has to meet the state and county guidelines when they write it.
Yes.
And I'm almost positive, you can check it, I'm positive it's a county, because it can't be one of us that does it.
It definitely could be the county, but we should be advising the RFP process. It
Yeah.
should not be,
No,
oh, Kristen goes home and writes this for
Yeah.
us, right?
But
That's what we're saying. It's
Okay.
not who is literally signing it. It should be the council that is putting together the RFP, or a committee that the council decides on. Do you see what I'm saying?
I'm seeing what you're
That's what's
saying,
at
and I
question.
guess I'm confused on who we go to actually do it. I'm really confused there.
Well, that's the RFP.
I submit a lot of grants for the fire department, and there's always some entity that we actually work with to do it, and I guess.
Well, we're here at the table with you.
Yeah, I see
Right.
that, but you're not the people that are actually writing it then, you're the ones that are gonna administer it then.
I have nothing to do with the grant.
See,
Yeah, the
that's what
RFP is not how,
Who does?
It's, it is the Fire Protection Bureau
Okay,
right now that has the funds, right? I don't have them. That's why
Okay.
I don't have all the answers. And the RFP has not technically come out. That's the
Mid-April, right?
application
Mid-April.
process.
That's
That's what you need to do.
Did the DNRC apply to a Western States grant to get the funding to update the CWP?
Yes, so it's
So
a
Western States grant
States grant
that the
that
DNRC has.
received. So they're administering it, but they are requesting RFPs from the county so that they can prioritize and divvy out those funds. That RFP hasn't come out yet. It's coming, like she's.
You mean the application
Yes.
for that?
That.
And the
that
application will-
process.
The
Yes, it'll
application will
say-
set forth what
Yes.
they want the request for
Yes.
proposal to address.
But like, we also still have to, how are we going to receive funding? Right?
Yeah. it's
Right,
gotta come
and
through
so
somebody.
it's, but that's what we're saying,
Yeah,
is we
got it.
need we need to define roles and organizational structure so that we can answer these questions and decide these questions, because it isn't something that Bridget should be deciding all of this on her own. We don't want that,
We're
right?
gonna wind
We
up in the
want-
same place as
Yes.
we did with
Yeah.
a CWPP that doesn't get funded.
Right, and we discussed organizational structure, not as a like what Ken was talking about for the team, that wasn't for the council. That is a normal process for doing a CWPP. You set up a core team.
Right.
That was never intended as an organizational structure for
Right,
the council.
like I said, that was
Right.
we identified the worker bees to put this thing together.
Yeah.
But that was not the governance for that process.
Yeah, and it doesn't.
We never discussed how that would be governed.
Right, well, that isn't necessarily governed because the
Well,
consultant
governance in the
was-
sense of an organizational structure and a
Okay.
responsible
Yeah.
decision-making entity. So
Yeah,
that kind of governance.
Go ahead, Jake.
Where does it, I don't even know if Eric Hoover is part of the county anymore. Where does he come into play? We've had all this discussion and argument in his office. And it's confusing to me because he was setting up a emergency disaster plan, which in effect is picking up the pieces after disaster happens, which you're trying to prevent here. But there were government agencies involved in that, and there was a fair amount of work done before COVID. And then the brakes were put on and so forth, but That's whose phone's gonna ring off the wall. It's not gonna be Christians, is it?
Eric is actually a
So
member.
why aren't we working with a point person there?
We are,
Eric's been here for every meeting except. this.
except for this.
Okay. Okay.
And he's not online this time, so I don't know where Eric is, but he has been. And we
And we've
talked
got Zay
about,
on here too, so
Okay.
we got the sheriff's office on here,
Okay.
yeah.
And ultimately, the discussion again is to look at that structure, and I mean, even looking at your mission statement, when we go back to that. So it says the mission is to promote and facilitate long-term reduction of risk for wildfire, and it was mentioned that the CWPP, that's what you wanna kind of oversee. So, I mean, there may be even opportunity or a need to actually rewrite that mission statement so that you actually have that governance to kind of do what you're actually gonna do. Because if you're just promoting and facilitating, you see what I'm doing, that's not accomplishing a CWPP or an RFP or anything else. And so promoting and facilitation is part of what I think most goals should be made of, but it shouldn't necessarily be your ultimate goal. And when you actually have those goals, just like the CWPP, when you have something tangible that folks can actually see, wrap their heads around, it's a whole lot easier to get action because there is that timeline that's moving. But what happens when you don't have that with this group? What does that look like? What does that structure need to look like? So that there is other things that, okay, fast forward, it's 2040, we need another CWPP, but now we have so many houses that we need something else. I mean, and I'm just throwing something out there, but there needs to be that structure and that organization and membership so that when all of this group decides that they're like, yep, I've done my time with Fire in the Road, who's coming back? Who is going to be those people other than the people that actually have to be at the table? Because it is technically their job, or they were requested to be here. And those are the pieces. How do you get that recruitment without a structure? It's going to be extremely difficult because most folks, and I'm going to speak for the millennials and for your Gen Zers, they want to have an establishment of what's going on before they ever commit themselves. And I think that's the thing. and most volunteers, but the new frames of volunteers that are coming in, and this is where a lot of organizations are struggling, is because they don't have definitive timelines, definitive membership guidelines, that framework where someone wants to come in and say, yep, I'm willing to go ahead and dedicate my 3 years and fully dedicate, and I'll be a part of this committee and that committee, but at the end of the 3 years, I'm done, I've accomplished whatever I'm gonna accomplish. And what does that look like turnover wise? And if you have a board, if you have that hierarchy, there is that, but again, who is that board? Is it all, someone of the entities? Because if they're gone, if all of a sudden, the CWP comes back and they say, we don't want the DNRC a part of it, then you lose all of that group. So, what does that look like in theoretically a sustainable model? And obviously there's lots of things to consider in that, but again, looking at the vastness of the valley, trying to get those residents and representation from each of those communities, because that's going to be one of the easiest ways to get your outreach, is having some sort of liaison, and again, I don't know what that looks like, but having that piece so that it is, the person that's okay, Kimberly's here from Darby and Kimberly's going to talk to the Darby, volunteer firefighting group. Then she's gonna go to the, Chamber of Commerce and speak to them about, these are the plants that you should be putting at your house and, those types of things. Like, what does that structure look like? Does this group, including the folks online, is this the entity that needs to make that decision? Does it go out in the survey? Does it go out in, whatever that looks like? What does the group think? How should that look? And I will just speak after, the county collaborative also asked me to facilitate, I think, to do a trial. And they're gonna do another trial with someone else as their facilitator. But again, it makes it really difficult for a facilitator to come in and help you make that decision if there's nobody that can make that decision. Because I certainly don't wanna say as the facilitator, okay, these were great, and we're gonna go with the hierarchy because that's the only person that spoke. And so in those types of situations like that needs to collectively manifest and organically manifest, but time is of the essence, especially because you have that other tangible that you work so hard to get to, and you want to be able to fulfill that, but you need the bodies to do so, and you need that structure to help accomplish that and keep the train on the tracks and moving forward. And especially when you don't have the entities, so to speak, be that push. You're not going to have Bridget pushing that every meeting or every, you know, whatever, every weekly or whatever that looks like. Really trying to figure out what that looks like from this group. Who is that? Do we have volunteers? Do we do it as a volunteer basis? Do you do it as a nomination process? And trying to figure out which structure works best for this group and with the things and the tangibles that you have coming.
I just want to make an observation that although the hierarchical system sounds like it makes a lot of sense, I don't think we're there with the people that we have coming. So is it worth continuing to talk about that model? Can we continue on with the team model that we have been doing until we get more tangible things that we can take action on? It seems like the highest priority is the funding. Without funding, we can't do anything anyway. Can we decide on a funding team, and the funding team can decide what kind of model they want to have, but it doesn't apply to everything as a whole? Can we try that?
You certainly can try it. I mean, again, this is your group and this is a discussion
Well,
amongst
I'm just
yourselves, but
observing that we don't have, there's not even as many people here tonight and online as there usually is.
Right.
So we don't have people that are going to volunteer. We talked about from the beginning, it was supposed to be a collaborative process, and there's supposed to be more residents. There aren't more residents, and this resident is not ready to be at the top of the hierarchy. So I'm just saying, I don't think we're there yet. It's an ideal place to get to, but we're not gonna get there tonight, I don't think.
I think membership would be a good start, maybe for us figuring
Well,
out.
remember last time membership came up, we had a couple of builders here and they said, whoa, membership, I didn't say I wanted to be a member.
Right, so we need to
And we
identify what
changed
that is.
everything in our presentation and everything else to participate.
Yeah, and so that's why we need to
And
identify that
made
membership.
perfect sense. It's a good idea. But it's not the kind of thing that you can then build into some kind of voting structure, if that's where we end up. You know? I think Judy might be right on track here with the idea that we have a few things going on that have involvement by various teams or committees or whatever. And they're bringing things back to the whole group for decisions. And yeah, it's slow. And it takes us 2 months or 3 months instead of one board meeting or one sit down with a man.
And we could speed that up by doing emails to people when we are at a certain place. It's 2 weeks from the last meeting. We don't want to wait.
So how
another
do we
2 weeks.
decide who gets the emails though, too? That's why we also need like that.
and who sends them? I mean, that's the other piece,
The
without
committee-
someone,
The team that has something going on, like if it's something for outreach and education, one of those people on that team of 3 will do that. Send the email out.
And send it to everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we've been very successful at coming to consensus on everything we've done
It's
so far.
actually remarkably
Yeah.
successful.
We have been. There's been a lot of give and takes and we've done it
Yeah.
quite well.
Yeah.
So I think the purpose of this is to really seek more participation. And so whether that be going out and finding more, like recruiting more people we need help. And so we need more people. And so that's where I'm really looking to you all. I need your help to bring more people, to bring the people that we need at the table to the table.
And that's
I
where
think
I'm
Judy was
stuck.
right on target there too, when she said, there has to be something that seems real enough to get involved in.
But
You know,
it needs a
and-
structure to do that.
To be
Like we
involved
have-
in it.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have.
And I don't know that we need an
I don't
organizational
think so.
structure, but we need some tangible.
Well, you have to try that, but here's the thing. Bridget is doing, like, we are doing a lot of the administrative work.
I know,
And so, but for this to be a grassroots project, that cannot continue, right? And we have set up a funding group and we have set up an outreach group, and it was Judy. And it was just a few people on the funding, which didn't get anywhere, right? So that's what we're saying is, in order to get projects going, we have to have funding. We have to have participation. We have to have somebody doing it, not just Bridget carrying it and supporting it and funding it. But that's where we are right now. So that's what we're saying is that it's that foundation thing that I kept stressing, and I know you guys were frustrated with me, but without that, you can't get these projects off. We've kind of done it, but we're finding that we need a decision-making structure set in place. We're needing to have roles defined so that it isn't put on Bridget to make a decision over funding, right? Judy has some awesome outreach ideas. It will require funding. It has required Bridget essentially funding it, deciding that it's, you guys said, yes, go for it. But without Bridget's funding,
But we don't have
it would go
funding,
nowhere.
and we have no funding,
But
so.
that's why we need to create this organizational structure. So that we can, so that we have an entity that can.
I don't
search
think you
for
need
the
an
money.
organizational structure
To
to
create
put
funding.
together a funding strike force. That's,
No, but
But
we
we
tried.
did, so we did that,
Well-
and that's
We
where
did it
I'm
well.
the only person on every single committee. I run the council, and I can't do it all
Well-
alone.
Do we have a mission statement, a definitive mission statement?
yeah. Right here.
Yes.
We have, and this top one is a description of what we are, and there's the mission statement.
Okay.
the biggest hurdle we face is funding. It's not organizational structure.
Right.
We can deal with our organizational structure and let that develop as we see fit. But right now, to get a team approach has worked. But the biggest hurdle is funding. So where does that funding come from? It's not gonna come from the county. It's not gonna come from the fire departments. They don't have money.
What funding are you talking about for the two? Gotta be specific. Are you talking funding in general, funding for the CWPP, funding for a coordinator, funding for projects?
Well, we
Yeah.
need, if Judy is going to implement her outreach program, she needs funding.
You
So
also
she can
need
get
to-
started on that if she had funding.
So who's gonna search for that funding?
That's the big question.
That's what we're saying. You gotta have that structure.
No, you just have to find the right
Person.
half a dozen people that have skill to
She
set.
had her hand up raised for last.
Okay, well, yeah, I think there's two things that are, and I'm obviously late in the game here. But first of all, the funding has to go, well, there's two things. The funding has to go to someone or something. So you have to have an
Are
item
receiving
to
them.
whom the funds are given.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, a crucial thing on the funding thing. But, I'm looking at the plan, and I've spent some time on the website, and I'm listening, and it seems that, I don't know how to, I'm not gonna be tactful. You don't know what I look like anyway, so that's okay. There's too many things there. I mean, that is a great, huge goal, but what really is exciting people and what got me here tonight is I want to have input on a wildfire risk plan.
Right.
And so there's that. There's obviously the structural fire departments. I'm gonna probably offend you, but that, whatever you want to say, I mean, the people who aren't wildfire fires primarily, although they may end up defending a house up Lost Horse Mine. And I don't know if that needs to be, there's a group of people in the valley who are really interested in structural fire organizational support, I guess, because we need our volunteer fire departments desperately. And then there's the wildfire. I guess what I'm asking is, does the mission statement need to be more specific to get people like me who are really interested in one, even though I, know who's gonna come to my house. But I have a Forest Service background, and so I'm wildfire conscious and aware, let's just say. And so how do we attract people to specific projects? Does it mean that we need to have 2 bullet points under our mission statement saying wildfire risk, structural fire, and a person to whom you direct any energy? Okay, I think you got the point. I don't know if that's appropriate or not. And the other is, somehow you have to have someone who gets the money.
Bitterroot RC&D has said that they will act as an umbrella entity for us as a 503C because they can receive that. So that definitely is an option.
So the funding comes actually to RC&D.
And yes, they can accept it for us, but we have to pay them. Like, there are fees for them to administer it. And so, and ultimately, we would probably want to establish ourselves as a 503C. The 501. Or 501c3. 501c3.
There you go.
But that also requires organizational structure. Like, it's just something that it's kind of basic, but we pushed through because we really wanted to get moving and address some of this urgent need. But we're finding we need to define roles. We need to have a decision-making process going, because if Judy comes with a project, we need to be able to figure out what, if it's consensus, that's great, but we need to have it defined that's, can she just go if she hears back from 3 people? Does that mean yes? And, we're also facing, like, we have our Fire in the Root logo that we'd love to, I have a document I'm working on and we have Fire in the Root logo. Do I need to come to the group? Do I need to come to the council and make sure everybody approves that, because that is our logo? Right? There's those types of things that we need to define. And I understand that need to just get going and do these projects, but we need to define roles and how we are going to operate, or it's really going to bite us in the butt as we move forward and entities join on because they want to work on the CWPP, which is an incredibly awesome and difficult endeavor that we've got to have our ducks in a row in order to do. So it's like, we just need to get our ducks in a row. We have an awesome group of people here that keep showing up, so we can do this. And we know how to compromise and collaborate because we've been doing it for a year. But we got to define some things.
Well, since it's 8:30, I'm gonna allow one more comment.
Yeah, I just want to say that I don't think that it's necessary that all the roles somebody gets pinned to a role now. I think it would be relevant to identify the roles in the organization and then build the boxes in the org, and there isn't a name necessarily in there. So, until now, getting support for the CWPP was the #1 priority. it sounds like another priority coming to the forefront is funding to help facilitate doing recruitment or membership or PIO sort of stuff. So that a box with somebody who's kind of running head point on CWPP can stay there. Now identifying that box for like a funding person who everybody is kind of rallying behind that person, help push that. And then as things grow and evolve, we can fill those boxes, and they I guess what I really want to hit on is the boxes don't have to be filled for the organization in place.
Just a function.
I agree with the concept of having the boxes laid out and not necessarily filling them, but it's a different structure if you fill it with functions like the person that's heading up the CWPP and the person that's heading up the education and outreach, and versus having those same, let's say for the sake of this discussion, there's 5 boxes, right?
Sure.
And so the CWPP is one, education and outreach is another, and funding is a third one, and whatever, right? Okay. That's a different structure than Forest Service representative filling one, the NRC representative filling one, Volunteer Fire Council filling one, Emergency Services filling one. It's a completely different structure. And it will behave differently through time. Because the CWPP is a big deal right now. And in a sense, we the CWPP has been driving the council for 4 or 5 months and will continue to for at least that long again, and maybe a year. But it won't, 2 years from now, it won't, because we'll have signatures, even the county commissioners will sign it. And we'll have an implementation, but it'll go back to the entities like the education and outreach will be implementing their part, funding and so on. So I guess what I'm getting at is if we base those boxes and some kind of a hierarchical board structure on the organizations involved, it looks different. And even though the people change, the organization stays the same. Versus a functional organization that changes through time. And it's not the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that one is necessarily better than the other. I'm just saying that they're different.
No doubt. And I don't have near the skin in this game than many of you guys do, but it seems clear to me that, to your point about membership, recruit, retain, energy, funding, like there needs to be something other than a feeling of, I don't know what a good analogy would be, but like a club. And that's kind of how it feels. And there's a couple of key players at the club.
Yeah.
And do you want to go down to the clubhouse tonight and talk about fire in the road? Or do we want to like work towards this next thing? And who's spearheading that? And whether that is siloed by a chairperson or by a function is personally irrelevant to me. Those seem to be the topics right now and can evolve. But I'm personally an organization.
I guess the biggest difference between those two that you just mentioned is that if the big organizations, the Forest Service has delegation of authority. So the person sitting in that box has delegated authority to make decisions. Same with the NRC, same with the Fire Council, and fundamentally different than people who, well, Byron's the team leader for the community wildfire protection plan. So he has the authority for all of the team members, peripheral and, well, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, And Judy has the authority to make the decision on everything to do with education and outreach. It's just fundamentally different.
I think that you have the power to create the decision space, though. You can kind of determine, well, Byron is the CWPP guy, and he has this crew that he's working with, and they are gonna need to have some decision space to operate within. But for bigger stuff, like he's gonna need to bring it to the council, and they convene and decide.
This is another maybe confusing part, is pretty much everyone, like a part of everyone on the council or with the
It's
council.
whoever shows up.
Is whoever shows up, but is also all working on the CWPP. Like we're all working.
Yeah, you're gonna still wear multiple hats. and
Right,
maybe
right.
Like my specialty is, maybe Judy's the chair for funding, and I'm working for Judy in this role, but, and Byron's the chair of CWPP, and I'm helping him in this role, like, we're still gonna wear multiple hats. but we
Right,
we don't have to, you guys decide, but I would encourage some like point person.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And structure is going to provide clarity, and I think when you're trying to recruit members, they're going to have a really clear understanding of what's actually happening here, not someone that's gonna come in without any idea of what's happening. And again, those roles, responsibilities, however you delineate them out, who is that person? Who, because it's gonna take that time of like, okay, the CWPP person is in charge of this, and this. The education person is in charge of this, and this. And so having an entity or a body that can actually make that decision as a collective is going to be a lot more efficient in the long run, given the priorities that are currently, and not that you necessarily have to go with this giant wheel, because you've already sort of listed some of the priorities that you have. So, as you build capacity in bodies and residents, et cetera, then you can kind of start, okay, we have enough folks in the CWPP and we have enough folks in funding, let's go and move into some of these other structures. But having some sort of structure as opposed to, and I think your analogy on the club is spot on, because we could certainly go all meet and it's gonna do something, we're just gonna do something, I'm gonna go have a beer, I don't know about anybody else, but we'll figure that out, yeah. And so, it's totally different when you want to start having the tangible, and I think that in lies the piece, and that's why I think, for the last 5 or 6 months, it was easier to really push forward and keep the wheel going or the train on the track, so to speak, because you had that tangible, and now you've met that goal. You've actually gone through, the commissioners have signed off on that initial portion. So now there's gonna be even a bigger step, and without that organizational piece, it's going to be a whole lot more difficult to be able to make those decisions in a quick manner, as opposed to taking in, we're gonna be running out of time, so I appreciate everybody's patience hanging on here. But you need to have some sort of structure, and again, like I talked about in the beginning, not one structure is gonna solve everything. There are gonna be advantages and disadvantages to each of those structures. But what comes together is then it's clear, it's efficient, you can move forward. And when you do have those projects, there is an entity in place to say, yep, Judy, go ahead, we got 20,000 for your educational piece and go for it. As opposed to it just being, well, should we go for it, should we not go for it? And again, that analogy of the club is spot on, because that's the difference. Do you want to be a fire in the RIT organization, or do you want to be a fire in the RIT club? And what that ultimately looks like, there's memberships, there's things that go into that hierarchy of organization. And again, I appreciate your time, and there's lots to think about. I think, coming to the next meeting, we'll visit and kind of look at what that looks like, but trying to figure out what that looks like for this group and the best model for each of you.
We've established that we don't have enough organizational structure to make a decision on what our organizational structure is.
Which is okay.
So with that, We can table it till next time.
But do we have somebody that can, a group of people that can get together and start preparing for the funding aspect? If we have the opportunity to do some application for funding before next month's meeting, they should go.
Yeah, if it's gonna come out in the next,
So who's that gonna be?
if it's gonna come out in 10 days, we can't wait 30 days to look at it.
Exactly.
Yeah, we need to look at it right away.
It should be out mid-April.
So as
So-
soon
that's
as it's
10
out, would
days
you
from
send it
now.
to us?
Yeah,
Okay, the minute that application comes, we need to.
But we are, we
Yes.
can even like start working on it, because we know those tenants that they're looking for, right? And we know, like, I mean, you've done lots of grant applications. I have not, I'm not a grant specialist by any means, so. I think there's definitely work that can be done right now to start compiling, because we know they wanted that local support. We know that they wanted to see priority, that, that there was a entity that could drive it, right? That there's risk involved, right? You needed to show that, or that, Ward County was high risk, so a risk map.
That
is-
risk is easy.
Yeah, that one is easy, but it's still, you know, somebody needs to compile it.
I was on the founding members of a nonprofit about 2 years ago. And basically, if we're only gonna be looking at funding from state, getting a 501c state thing, basically, someone, and it wasn't me, I have to say, but did it in about half an hour on the internet that we had it.
Yeah. We
Is
probably
that-
will wanna get.
No.
I don't
funding
think so.
No, it took us a long time to get our 501c3
You
in the
think
fire
so?
department,
Just the state?
and it's expensive,
No,
yes.
this wasn't.
Ours
That's,
was
I am thinking that might be like a, what is it, a 501(c)(3)(b, like
That
a,
could be.
there's different stages. But also, we probably will